Yeah, we can start the meeting. So, good evening, everyone. Today, we are going to delve deep into the topic of greedflation. Uh, uh, Greedflation has been is a term that had been coined very recently regarding the increase in the inflation due to corporates profit in fueling the inflation of a country. It is a much recent term which to be coined regarding the various factors that has been affecting the inflation. So today we can delve deep into it and understand a bit more and have a uh, good enough grasp of the concept as possible. So we can start with the basic question: what is greedflation? Anyone would like to start?
Yeah, so I would like to add on to that, that basically we have seen that since COVID-19, like after COVID-19 ended, there has been a rise in the inflation levels all through the worldwide. It's a worldwide phenomena regarding the rise in inflation. So what is happening and what is being observed is that so greedflation is something which has come recently, and it is about how the rise in corporate profits is one driving factor of this rise in inflation. And how is that happening is that the corporate and like the big corporate companies already know that there is a rise in inflation, which means there is a rise in prices worldwide. So to take advantage of that little opportunity, they are raising the prices of their products and whatever services or goods they are offering, which is why the prices are rising furthermore, and this is leading to a rise in the profits. So there is a question, that is that rise in price which is being done by the corporates because they are greedy for profits, is that a cause for greedflation? That is the basic meaning of this new thing, which is greedflation.
Sanya.
Yeah, I agree with Aditi. I feel today's inflation has little to do with fiscal policy or demand conditions. Instead, it is the result of a maniacal profit-making spree in the corporate sector. Even numerous economists and progressive critics in the West have suggested that corporations took advantage of this outbreak and the aftermath to raise the prices above what was necessary to make a profit. So, greedflation occurred when, rather than a traditional wage price spiral, it is the profit price spiral that gained momentum.
Yeah, so just to add on to what both Sanya and Aditi had already said, actually, greedflation by itself is a concept which is widely used in the capitalist economy, and most of the capitalist companies use this as a measure to to gain extra profits, just in the name of inflation. And also, I would like to add on one very important point, and that is greedflation actually has a lot of similarity to shrinkflation. Shrinkflation actually refers to one phenomenon wherein FMCG companies normally use this technique, wherein they actually reduce the contents of the packaging for the same amount of money which we give. For example, if I were to say, Parle-G is a biscuit which is normally very famous in the Indian households. The contents of Parle-G about close to 10 or 15 years ago used to be 200 grams for 10 rupees. And the same Parle-G biscuit packet as of now, I think it actually comes to somewhere between 50 to 75 grams, and that is shrinkflation. So I would say that shrinkflation has a stark similarity to greedflation. So this is which I would like to say.
Yeah, so we have gotten a little bit of an idea of what greedflation is. So we can move on to the next question in hand. We have that what can be the reasonable explanation for the increase in inflation, whether it is just being fueled by greedflation, or is greedflation just one of the component leading to it? Yeah, Aditi. Aditi, I think you're muted.
Yeah. So regarding the reasonable explanation for the rise in prices, we all know that because of the like shortage in supply, which happened because of the problems which arose because of the COVID-19. There were supply chain issues because of which the resources became scarce. Even the products and services were not able to get transported easily because of so many problems and issues, which is why there was a shortage of supply and the rise in prices started happening. So what happens is, when the domestic companies or whatever corporations are there and they think they have a upper hand at being able to influence the prices, maybe you can take an example of a monopoly. So when they saw this opportunity that they can influence the prices, so they started influencing it. So apart from the natural factors and the quite like logical factors which we all know that which lead to inflation, there was this additional thing about the corporate profits which led to the greedflation.
Anyone like to add on to the points raised by Aditi? Yeah, Chetan.
Yeah, so I would just like to add on to the point that inflation, while traditionally being a mode, like we see a rise in prices to at some point to see an offset in the rising production costs, perhaps. That is why inflation at some point occurs. Uh, but greedflation is something which is not driven by any other factor than the simple corporate greed. And it's it usually occurs in situations where it is not necessarily a free market and there is a market imbalance, sort of like it exists in a monopolistic or an oligopolistic uh, market sector usually. And that is, I think, a crucial reason for greedflation in comparison to just inflation.
Yeah, Sanya.
Adding to what Aditi and Chetan said, I think what I draw from both of these points is that when discussing the actual causal mechanisms, so we can actually explicitly reject the simple explanation of greedflation, which is usually understood as either an increase in the monopoly power or firms using existing power to take advantage of high demand.
Yeah, Vasu, you can add. Do you want to add on
Yes.
some points?
Yes. Actually, speaking on the current economic order part, actually, even before the COVID-19 pandemic, struck the world, the world economy by itself was not in a very good position, and COVID-19 pandemic actually even worsened the whole position as of now. And the main factor about this current situation is that most of the developed countries were completely dependent on China for their production. So the being completely dependent on one country for meeting all your production needs, it would like, form some sort of a monopoly, wherein that country would have a huge amount of power when it actually comes to deciding the prices. So I think this could be one of the main reasons for which the which could actually explain the current economic position. So this is something which I wanted to add.
Yeah, so we can say that the current inflation is not just fueled by greedflation. There are many other minuscule reasons that has led to the increase in prices of commodity goods and services. So moving on to the next question, is there any way to control this drastic change in prices uh, uh, in terms of policy making, or whether or from the corporate point of view?
Can I go ahead?
Yeah. Yes, Anya.
I think an accurate way is difficult because economists either underestimate the cost of managing inflation through engineered recessions or they overestimate the risk that the labor market poses to price stability. However, I really liked what Professor Isabel M. Weber argued in the Guardian article. She said that policies like windfall profit taxes and the development of absorbers to deter price gouging and lessen the effects of systematic disruptions can be used to curb this seller's inflation caused by businesses taking advantage of supply shocks and disruptions to raise prices.
I just want to add a little bit on this. So, what I understand, I don't really know much about the topic, but what I understand from this is that greedflation, from the majority of the concept, is essentially overhiking the prices by the corporates, which in turn increases inflation. Correct. So, in that regard, we already, like specifically in India, we already have anti-profiteering measures, right? Although those are disputed in a lot of manners, those are still in quotes about it. But we do have policies governing anti-profiteering, and if those policies are taken on a stricter level, not just in India but at a world economy level, then I think that is something that could significantly reduce greedflation.
Yes, Aditi, you like to add on?
Yeah. So, you guys mentioned about the profit making things, I would like to add on to that. And to explain that, I would like to throw some light upon the wage price spiral thing, which I think Sanya mentioned before. So, basically, to explain what wage price spiral is, that if prices rise, workers can be expected to demand higher wages in an economy, but higher wages would lead to higher demands as well, because they'll have a higher purchasing power. But because we know that the supply has not increased because of the existing barriers which are there, so inflation would further rise. But what the central banks or the Fed can do in this regard is raising the interest rates further to slow, but that would lead to a slowdown in the overall economic activity, which would lead to job losses and all. But what if the prices were rising not because what if the prices were rising not because the workers were getting higher wages, but because the companies were making higher profits? So this happens when the companies try to take advantage of any kind of natural disaster, and this advantage is taken by when the companies have made a higher markup price. That is when they raise the prices far in excess of the raise in the input cost of making the products. So what can be done in this regard is that some kind of policies can be made in which the input prices cannot be raised up up till after a certain level, so that that balance is maintained and excess profit cannot be extracted out of them.
Yeah. So we can, yeah, Chetan, you like to add?
Yeah, so specifically on the point of greedflation, I would like to take for this point on a sort of regulatory measure, perhaps, to limit and prevent any increase of the prices above and beyond a certain point. And if any such increase does happen, then the same has to go through an approval, perhaps through a ministry. That was what I think.
Yeah, Vasu.
Yeah, just to add on to the, the on the solutions to contain greedflation. The one thing on the macro level, which I would say is that, the developed countries must ensure that they actually diversify their own supply chains to ensure that, they don't have a knee-jerk reaction when it actually comes to, if they're actually facing a pandemic. And and also, similar to what Aditi, Sania, and also Chetan had said, the government must step in, and they must ensure that they actually keep a cap on the prices, and also they must also bring in laws, and also they must bring in laws to ensure that the companies don't profit on the economic situation, and they don't gain extra profits. So there's all this, I would say.
So on to the Vasu's point, but I would like to ask whether putting a cap on certain goods and commodities, would it be a good way for companies to grow for inside a companies? Would it attract more companies into the market of a country if the government is acting a little bit hostile? Companies might feel that government is acting a little bit of hostile manner.
Yeah, but actually, this was in response to what the companies had did. So even they had also indulged in anti marketing practices. So I think this should be met in the most strictest way possible. So I think I strongly feel that putting a cap on the prices should be the way, at least for the short term.
And as far as I know, Europe is already enacting price caps, and US Biden administration working to lower oil prices, and even UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is considering measures to control grocery prices now.
Yes, Aditi. Yes, Aditi.
Yeah, adding to your question, that would it be not beneficial for the companies if the government acts in a hostile way? I think it will be good for the economy as a whole, because if the companies who are taking in such measures, if they are controlled, then even the smaller players would be able to, expand their businesses. And like the MSMEs, for example, they don't have that much reach and that much scale. And if the bigger corporations start to extract profits in such situations, uh, the smaller companies would not be able to make their products. And the MSMEs, for example, in India, are very important part of the economy. So if there is some kind of a stabilization policy by the government and some kind of better supply chain management, then it would be proven to be useful for the whole economy as a whole.
Yeah, Pratha.
All right. So, to that point, I think first of all, profit making, considering profit making is the first aspect of pretty much every and any company. Significantly or drastically capping the prices might actually lead the economy to suffer in terms of foreign entrants coming into the market. However, I think the government, instead of just price capping, although that is obviously there, other than that, they could also promote subsidies and any sort of measure that would in turn reduce prices when it comes down to the customers. So when you go to the end market and the end user of the product, they would get it at a subsidized rate, hence again reducing inflation. So the only measure to curb greedflation is not price capping. It could also be policy measures in terms of subsidies and in terms of zero tax rates and things like that.
Actually, just to add on to what I actually said, when there must be a price cap on the companies which operate. I actually meant that, look, when companies operate in the most ethical way and in the most honest way possible, I am actually not against it. But actually earning profits through the most in the illegal ways possible. This is something which must be curbed at all ways possible. So I think at least considering the current economic situation, I strongly feel that price cap is something which we must strongly consider.
So moving on, like one of the question that arises is regarding if the government does include put on more restrictions regarding the corporate greed, would it lead to corporates where a lot of NGOs and all working on corporate social responsibility funds, CSR funds, would it actually affect the CSR, or would it would the since they are making less of a profit when there are restrictions put upon them by the government? So that would be a good question. Yeah, Pratha.
So CSR is a regulatory mandate on every company. That is something that they have to invest in regardless of whether they want to or not, correct? So CSR, having a CSR fund is a mandatory for every company. And in any case, in the latest budget, the tax incentives with respect to CSR have been eliminated completely, which in turn is going to lead to a discouragement in the market or within the corporate sector to actually invest in CSR activities in general. So knowing that, I think price capping or any sort of a hostile measure would just add on to it rather than, completely dissuade them. It would be more like an extra pressure on the companies rather than a completely different burden altogether.
So moving on to the last part of the last question. What is the scenario in case of India regarding the issues arising from the greedflation? What India specific issue that has been going on regarding this phenomena?
Yeah, can I add?
Yeah. Go on.
Yeah, so I read that the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, CMIE, his CEO did some research and gave the figures that the net profits of India during the March 2023 quarter were quite higher than what it would naturally be. So, according to the research which was done by him, he said that the continued higher profits can no longer be because of the increased formalization of the economy because of inflation or because of the hike of the commodity prices in general, and there could only be few reasons which would lead to this amount of like the higher profits which are there in this quarter of the March 2023 quarter. And this can be the higher sales with the same profit margins, or higher profit margins with the same level of sales, or a combination of both. So he also said that 60% of the growth in net profits can be attributed to the increase in the profit margin, which is being done by the corporates, which again is a sign of greedflation in case of India.
Sanya, you wanted to add something?
No, actually, I had the same resource to quote, sir.
So, yeah, Chetan.
So on a more macro level, I think greedflation can be tackled by India by maintaining better relations with, let's say, the oil oligopoly in the Middle East that is there. So if we have better relations with the OPEC countries and just enter into agreements of good and fair practices for longer and continuous period of time, then I think that would be one of the ways that we could factor in, because greedflation would at in the greedflation would continuously be seen in industries like these, where the market is so joint that there is no competition to reduce the price, and everybody can keep on making and piling on the profits. So entering into such agreements and also finding alternates to let's say the an alternate to the OPEC countries in the Middle East could be the shale oil which is produced in the US. But essentially just looking for alternatives and at the same time trying to maintain good relations with such corporates largely.
Yeah, so we can conclude by saying that greedflation is a concept wherein corporate greed has led to a fueling of the inflation of a country. It cannot be the only reason that is fueling the inflation, but is one of the major factors post COVID, since companies have started to make an enormous amount of profits. These profits thereby increasing the inflation of a country and putting in additional pressure upon the consumers in the country. There are many ways to tackle this, including a few points that we had discussed, like better relation with the market players who have major stake in a certain market, and having better relationship with them can to some extent reduce or at least curb the effects of the corporate greedflation, as well as looking for better alternatives in case where when there are the prices of certain goods and commodities increase drastically. So yeah, we can conclude in this manner. So that's it for today. Like, thank you all for attending the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.